We've been upgrading everything in Minecraft to create the ultimate survival world. We've almost transformed every major biome and structure so far, and have even been throwing in some gameplay upgrades with Easter eggs, side quests, and of course an entire storyline. Here on the TrixyBlox channel, we're adventuring through every biome in the USW in a series of mini-movies, and today we find ourselves in the mysterious Dark Forest. We're going to be encountering some strange and mischievous creatures, risking it all in a perilous heist, surviving a ravenous horde of plague zombies, and ultimately solving the many mysteries of the ominous Woodland Mansion. Before we start, I'm hosting a giveaway for you guys with around £300 worth of shiny Acer Predator prizes up for grabs. To enter, all you gotta do is subscribe to my YouTube channel, like this video, and follow me on Instagram. I'll be announcing the winners there on July 6th, so get entering. A big thank you to Acer Predator and Microsoft's Xbox Game Pass for providing these prizes and sponsoring this video. Also, be sure to catch up on the previous chapters of this story for full context, and of course, check out the building updates on the TrixyBlox channel. The Target episode has just released, and you seriously do not want to miss this one. Spoiler, it may or may not be based on the Vikings. And with that, it's time to get started on our adventure. So just sit back, grab yourself some popcorn, and get ready for the next mini-movie of the ultimate survival world. The Dark Forest is one of the most mysterious biomes of the USW. Riddled with curious tales of magical secrets, the Darkwood village resides on a mystical hillside, with the enchanted lake behind it, across which sits the Wizard's Tower. The forest is also home to the Woodland Mansion, once a charming family home, now abandoned and neglected, playing host to a horde of terrifying creatures and some of the USW's darkest secrets. And of course, the Dark Forest contains one particularly chilling mystery, located to the north, where no soul has ventured and returned for years. So, where does our Dark Forest story begin? Well, the forest is home to the Darkwood village, which on its surface appears to be an ordinary peaceful village, much like the plains. However, whilst the Darkwood village plays host to your typical Minecraft villagers, if you look closely enough, it also conceals some more interesting inhabitants. In fact, the Dark Forest is also home to a plethora of magical creatures and races, many of which remain undiscovered to this day. The first of many unusual beings found in the Dark Forest are the Hobbits, which reside in the centre of the village. The Hobbits are of course a nod to Tolkien's genius, and they are a small sub-race in our Darkwood village. Much like Tolkien's, our Hobbits are sticklers for adventure, and they're the life and soul of the party. They're also great friends with the wizard who lives above the village across the enchanted lake. He gets them into all sorts of mischief. The Darkwood villagers, much like our other USW villagers, have their own beliefs and several traditions that they observe throughout the year. The most prominent of which is the Night of the Fairies. They believe that their luck is dictated by magical fairies, called allays and vexes, which inhabit the trees of the forest. The allays are responsible for the villagers' good luck, whilst the vexes are always up to mischief, supposedly the cause of misfortune in the village. The villagers tell tales of these allays and vexes living high up in the trees, each with a distinct purpose. If you've lost one of your belongings, that'll be an aspen vex at work. If you can't remember something, that'll be a pesky oblivy. And if you're feeling angry, you likely have a turbi vex sat on your shoulder. Similarly, if you've bagged yourself a good crop yield, it's likely a Ceres allay has protected your crops. Essentially, the villagers have an allay or vex explanation for everything, so their relationship with them is considered a very important part of their lives. In their own rendition of a light festival, the Darkwood villagers spend weeks preparing for a special annual ceremony, lighting up the entire village with lanterns, orange to calm those troublesome vexes, and blue to honour their helpful allay friends. During this annual Night of the Fairies, the villagers dance and sing, upholding traditions passed on from their ancestors. They also enjoy a grand feast, leaving tiny leftovers in the trees as little offerings for their allay friends. The Darkwood village is also protected by a magical golem, said to be created centuries ago by the first folk to settle there. The stories of the Iron Golem's origins vary. Each Darkwood family seems to tell their children a slightly different tale about the Golem's origins. The most popular story suggests that the first forest dwellers had been persecuted for their beliefs, fleeing to the depths of the dark forest to make sanctuary. They created a secret mine, collecting iron for a special ritual, through which they would animate an iron creature to protect them and their descendants from outsiders. After several lengthy rituals and complex incantations, the Iron Golem was born, the eternal protector of the Darkwood village. Adventurers beware, he's a fierce fighter, and he won't hold back if you attack his people. Now behind the Darkwood village lies the Enchanted Lake and the Wizard's Tower, which you may have guessed is where the island's wizard resides. If you've had your listening ears on throughout previous chapters, you may recall that the wizard is said to be responsible for the convergence of the USW, a phenomenon which merged several different islands to create one magical multi-biomed landmass. The wizard does all he can to maintain a balance in the USW. With his hobbit friends by his side, he endeavours to protect the USW's darkest secrets and most precious treasures. However, it seems to be a common occurrence for mayhem to break out across the island, and despite the wizard's best efforts, the inhabitants of the USW have a real talent for trouble. The wizard spends much of his time beavering away in his tower, poring over clues to unravel the mysteries of the island, from the curse of the Scarab Amulet, to the emergence of new races in the ocean, to the disappearance of a wealthy family who lived in the nearby Woodland Mansion, and much, much more. In fact, he even became responsible for the legendary sword hidden deep within the forest, sheathed in stone. This sword, known as the Sword of Acna, is the most powerful weapon in the USW, and it actually belonged to the USW's protector, originating in the Snowy Mountains. It was entrusted to the wizard by the protector once his service was concluded, in hope that the wizard would find a new brave adventurer to take up the mantle. After years of searching, the wizard found no warrior worthy of the protector title. So, he halted his search, instead encasing the Sword of Acna in stone, hidden in the dark forest. The sword lies dormant, awaiting a worthy warrior to wield its power and journey through the USW, mending what's broken, retrieving lost treasures, and restoring balance on the island once and for all. Perhaps one of you guys will be brave enough to take on the challenge. And that brings us to the Woodland Mansion, once home to a wealthy family of merchants, now an ominous abandoned zombie haven. So, what happened? Well, it all started with the Darkwood merchants, a family of successful traders and adventurers who originated in the Darkwood village. They became the brokers of some very successful trade links, and soon became involved in some lucrative trading themselves, becoming entangled with the island's many secrets and discovering some of its ancient artefacts. This business was passed down through the family, and its profits allowed them to build a home beyond the village, to house their family and the many secrets they had discovered over centuries. The Darkwood merchants were renowned for their talents, but the broad knowledge and valuable relics they had collected also made them a target for both the jealousy of the Darkwood villagers and the greed of thieves and outlaws. The Woodland Mansion was their haven. They could store their knowledge in their grand library, raise their children in a safe environment, and keep an eye on the happenings of the Dark Forest. The wizard even cast enchantments upon the mansion and the family, in an attempt to protect the most precious treasures and secrets from falling into the wrong hands. And so, for many years, generations of the family lived peacefully in their mansion. Each generation grew up enjoying the grand home built by their ancestors, learning the tricks of the trade as they matured, eventually becoming part of the family business. Those who sought to wreck their idyllic life by infiltrating the mansion to uncover the island's secrets were unsuccessful. The wizard's enchantments kept the family safe for many years. However, it seemed that the family would unravel of its own accord. Many generations of success would be toppled by the ignorance of just one. With the Darkwood merchant family's youngest children grown up, they were almost old enough to step out from the safety of their Woodland Mansion home and into the ultimate survival world. They had learnt all they could from their parents and of course from the abundance of books in their grand library, but there was only so much that could be gleaned from scanning their inked pages. Eden, the family's eldest, had already set out on her own ventures, establishing a trade link down in the plains. That left the family's twins, Caius and June, who were eager to fly the nest and set out on their own adventures. Caius and June were fascinated by the mysteries of the USW. They would gather by the fire in their library, listening to their parents tell them tales of the island's brave protector, the lost treasure of the evil pharaoh, and even the elemental curse of the ancient jungle city. The pair would sneak out late at night to convene in the mansion's courtyard, sitting under the stars, dreaming of one day exploring the USW and discovering its secrets for themselves. One night, the twins were particularly engrossed in their parents' tales of the ancient jungle city. This tale was one of the most mysterious they'd heard, and they couldn't believe that the elemental curse had caused such a catastrophic storm, or that the city remained completely abandoned and untouched since. Even the Darkwood merchants had limited knowledge on what really happened and what remains in the depths of the jungle, and this gave Caius and June a great hunger for adventure. Later that night, they crept out into the courtyard in their usual fashion, but this time with a fresh spring in their steps. Their spirits lit up with a bright spark of curiosity. The pair hatched a plan together, plotting their very first adventure. They would get up at sunrise, gather their family's maps from the cartography room, stock up on food for their long journey, and head to the wizard's tower to sneak some potions for extra protection, before setting off on the family's fastest horses into the wilderness. It was their turn to prove themselves as the bravest of the family. They spent the day travelling through the jungle, juicing up on XP potions and coming close to dangers beyond their wildest nightmares. Luckily for Caius and June, the wizard's enchantments protected them from harm. In fact, their journey through the jungle was far less eventful than they were hoping. The twins eventually arrived at the grand entrance to the ancient jungle city, the Maze of the Jaguar. Armed with their book smarts, they stepped into the labyrinth with little trepidation. They were ready for anything. And with their only intentions being pure curiosity and a yearning for adventure, the maze was kind to the twins. As you may remember, those who set foot in the maze with ill intentions would find themselves lost in the labyrinth forever, tormented by the spirit of the Jaguar. But Caius and June were pure of heart, allowing them to beat the maze and enter the now forsaken jungle city. They reached the city's bridge and couldn't believe their eyes. The city was full of forgotten wonders, stretching as far as the eye could see. The twins immediately knew that their family would never believe they'd made it to the ancient jungle city, since none of them would dare to set foot near their cursed lands. But they'd really made it. And so, excited as ever, they crossed the bridge to the jungle temple, overwhelmed by its grand stature, but eager to find a way inside. The twins eventually reached the entrance and headed inside, discovering the Jungle King's tomb and the ancestral statues surrounding it. Unbeknownst to them, the wizard's enchantments had protected them from several booby traps they'd triggered, and they'd somehow made it inside unscathed. They were stunned to have found the fabled Jungle King's tomb, and took their time exploring, taking everything in. They were reluctant to leave, but soon realised they would need to travel home before too long if they were to make it back before dark. Desperate to prove that they'd made it to the jungle temple, the twins rummaged through the potions they'd taken from the wizard's tower, whilst bickering with one another over how they would explain all of this to their parents, and of course the wizard, who would not be best pleased by their thievery. They tossed out various potions, swiftness, levitation, healing. None of them seemed to be of any use here. And then eventually, they grabbed the last potion from the bag, a potion of shrinking. The pair looked at one another and then turned to the ancestral statue beside them. They both had the same idea, and without uttering a word, Caius launched the bottle at the statue. The ancestral statue shrunk before their very eyes, to the size of a large shoe. The pair celebrated with glee, snatching the statue from one another, squabbling over who should hold it on the journey home. And with the evidence in hand, Caius and June made their way back home, desperate to show their family what they had discovered. They would finally be taken seriously. And whilst they may have deceived the maze of the Jaguar, the twins had no idea how much trouble they would cause by stealing one of the ancestral statues from the jungle temple. Arriving home at dusk, the twins snuck inside, hiding the statue in one of the mansion's spare rooms, and crawling up to bed, exhausted from their long journey. They would deal with their worried parents in the morning. However, during the night, something peculiar happened. The shrinking potion used on the hidden ancestral statue wore off, and it grew back to its original size. Meanwhile, the wizard's enchantments fell away from the Woodland Mansion and the Darkwood merchants, leaving them unprotected and vulnerable. The twins, unbeknownst to them, had disturbed the sacred ancestral statues of the jungle city's deceased leaders, and for this, there was a price to pay, no matter the intentions of the disruptor. Unfortunately for Caius and June, their seemingly innocent adventures had sealed the fate of their family, and the luckless events that followed were nature's reprisal for their disruption of the peace. Morning came, and the twins knew they were in huge trouble. They awoke in a panic, realising they had a lot of explaining to do. They rushed to the spare room where they had hidden the statue to plan how they would explain everything to their parents. And they were staggered to find that the statue had returned to its full size. The pair finally grasped how serious this situation was, and how little they knew about the artefacts of the ancient jungle city and their properties. Stealing this statue was a terrible mistake. Rather than admitting their mistake to their parents, Caius and June fabricated a lie to cover up what they had done, until they could work out a way to get rid of the statue. They told them that they had gone to the enchanted lake to visit the wizard, and got lost while hunting for vexes. Their parents, of course, did not believe them. To avoid them getting into any more trouble, the twins were forced to join their parents on an expedition to the north, where they were heading to the forest's small port to inspect some off-island goods imported from a distant land. Unaware that they were no longer protected by the wizard's enchantments due to the wrath of the stolen statue, the family travelled north, oblivious to the danger they would face. After a very awkward and virtually silent journey, the family neared the dark forest's northern settlement as evening approached, with Caius and June following their parents closely to avoid angering them any further. As they drew closer to the village, they began to hear strange grumbling noises in the distance, along with dozens of rhythmic, soulless footsteps. The family apprehensively proceeded towards the village, horrified once they caught sight of what it had become. The villagers had fallen victim to some kind of vicious disease. Their skin had turned murky and green, and their eyes dull and watery. They patrolled the village, which was in tatters, the buildings falling apart and covered in cobwebs. Terrified but fascinated, the family stared in disbelief, before suddenly they heard a horrifying snarl behind them. Their horses reared up in a fright, and before they knew it, the merchants found themselves tumbling to the ground. They picked themselves up as fast as they could, clambering away from the zombie that was chasing them. Finding themselves in the centre of the village, they were surrounded by a horde of gruesome zombies. The Darkwood merchants were completely overrun. Just as all hope was lost, the door of the house behind them swung open and they tumbled inside. The door slammed shut, and the family collected their thoughts, stunned by what had just happened. From the shadows emerged a frail old man, wearing torn rags, looking both crazed and concerned. He told the Darkwood merchants that the trade route they had established years ago had brought a terrible plague to the island, leaving the village in disrepair and its inhabitants a savage zombie horde, which attacked any poor soul who encountered the village. The old man recalled that a handful of villagers managed to escape before catching the plague, travelling south, but they were shunned by the Darkwood village who did not wish to share their land, and so the survivors of the plague were forced to relocate in the jungle. He explained that they had turned to a life of pillaging in desperation to survive, and their presence on the jungle's border had supposedly evoked much anger in the jungle's Atakwa tribe, headed by their queen Yarima. The conflict would surely erupt in years to come. Stunned and confused by the old man's story, the family looked at one another, soon realising that each of them had been wounded by the horde. The old man's face turned cold, his eyes filled with horror, as he too noticed the family's injuries. In a panic, he told them they had just a few days before the plague would take hold, hurriedly forcing them to leave. He ushered them out the door, and the family made a run for their horses. As the snarling, gurgling horde chased after the Darkwood merchants, they desperately clambered onto their horses and rode through the forest as fast as they could. As their horses galloped through the dark forest, Caius and June knew what this meant. The wizard's enchantment had broken and their wounds were not healing rapidly like they normally would. Something must have triggered the wizard's enchantments falling away. They had read about this kind of misfortune countless times, and it could only be explained by a terrible curse. The twins realised they had to confess to their parents, explaining to them why the wizard's protections had failed them and showing them the ancestral jungle statue that they had hidden in the back rooms of the Woodland Mansion. Their only hope now was that their parents, with all their knowledge, would know what to do next. Caius and June's parents were angry and disappointed to hear about their mischief in the jungle, explaining that the wizard had forbade all from entering the ancient jungle city for good reason. He had been working on calming the elements to contain the elemental curse and prevent it from unleashing its wrath on the whole island. Thankfully, the twins had not disrupted the elemental totems, but they had instead tampered with the jungle's sacred ancestral statues. which had broken the wizard's protective enchantments and condemned the family to face terrible misfortune. Knowing that the wizard would refuse to help them after the twins' forbidden heist had broken his enchantments, the family became desperate to find a cure to the zombie plague before their time ran out. According to the old man they had encountered, the disease took a few days to take hold of the infected, and the family spent a good portion of this time scouring their extensive grand library for answers. After hours of research, they eventually came to the conclusion that their only option was to the south, on the mysterious Mushroom Swamp Island, said to be the home of a powerful coven of witches, the only beings capable of reversing such a curse besides the wizard. Knowing that the family's eldest daughter, Eden, had travelled down south to the plains to establish a new trade agreement with the village, the family knew that she was their only chance. And so they sent their fastest homing pigeon with a message for Eden, informing her of what had happened and asking for her help. Eden received the message and raced to the south on the plains village without hesitation. She came to the bridge, alarmed to see it had collapsed in the middle, which you may recall occurring in the Plains chapter. With no other choice, Eden dashed down to the water, diving into the ocean and swimming across to the island as fast as she could. She reached the edge of the harsh, steep landscape, clambering out of the water and beginning the perilous climb up the slopes of the Mushroom Swamp Island. Trying her best not to look down, she tentatively made her ascent, wincing at the sound of dislodged rocks tumbling down the harsh slopes beneath her feet. Finally, Eden made it to the top, darting up the hill and into the village. She reached the top, startled by the cackling coven of witches in the centre of the village. The witches prepared to attack, but Eden insisted they wait so she could explain herself. Amused by Eden's desperation, the witches listened as she begged them to help her save her family and cure them of the zombie plague before they were lost forever. The witches chatted amongst themselves, giggling and cackling before turning back to Eden. Strangely enough, they agreed to help. Eden was not convinced that their intentions were truly altruistic, but she had no choice but to trust them. The witches gathered around a cauldron, muttering incantations under their breath and throwing in various ingredients. Eden waited nearby until finally the witches returned to her with 4 potion bottles. They flashed her a twisted smile, handing over the potions and telling her to pass them on to her family, assuring her that the plague would be cured and the curse afflicted by the ancestral jungle statue would be lifted. Eden thanked the witches and rushed back down the hill, hearing their cackles fade as she neared the broken bridge. She clambered back down the cliffside, swam back to the mainland and jumped back on her horse, galloping northeast towards the dark forest. After a long ride, she reached the mansion, rushing inside to give her family the antidote to the plague. Caius, June and their parents gulped down the potions. With their time running out any second now, they had nothing to lose. With their potion bottles emptied, the family checked their wounds and to their surprise, they were healing. The potion seemed to have worked. They were cured. A few more moments passed, and as the family began to celebrate, something horrifying began to unfold. Before Eden's eyes, her family began to transform. Their skin dulled to a gloomy grey, and their expressions twisted and warped into something non-human, something evil and callous. And suddenly, the realisation hit her. Eden had been tricked by the witches. In fact, this was their plan all along. The merchant family had become the witches' evokers, essentially their eyes and ears on the mainland, who would protect the Woodland Mansion and its precious secrets for the witches to claim when their time came. They would guard the mansion, whilst the witches would bide their time and continue their preparations to defeat the wizard, take the mansion's secrets for themselves, and eventually achieve their goal of taking over the entire USW. Mortified by the transformation of her loved ones, Eden bolted out the door, her now deranged family totally unrecognisable. Sending their vexed ghouls to attack her, she mounted her horse and fled her home, distraught that she had lost her entire family as a result of the witch's deceit. Where she fled remains a mystery to the Darkwood villagers, but it is rumoured that she sought sanctuary with an old friend, somewhere in the west. Acting as mindless henchmen for the witches, the merchant family's strange abilities and obsession with protecting their home continues to keep the secrets of the Woodland Mansion hidden and the Coven's plan unspoiled. With their powerful magic and their pesky vex ghouls, they're a real force to be reckoned with. Many have attempted to infiltrate the mansion, but it is said that the merchant evokers remain carriers of the zombie plague, creating their very own horde of zombie protectors that patrol the mansion's halls. The only way to save the Darkwood and the rest of the island is to liberate the mansion and rid it of its evil. Perhaps someday a brave adventurer will liberate the mansion before it's too late. That's your cue, guys. The USW is going to need your help. And with a glimmer of hope remaining, that just about wraps up the Dark Forest chapter. Before we finish up, it's time to talk about today's awesome sponsors, Acer Predator Gaming and Microsoft's Xbox Game Pass. The Acer Predator Triton 300 SE is a super sleek but super powerful gaming laptop, packed with the essentials for a compact or even on-the-go setup. With its highly capable Intel i7 processor, a speedy refresh rate of 144Hz, and its NVIDIA GeForce RTX 3060 unleashing awesome graphics, this little laptop packs a real punch. And in addition to all of that, it comes with 1 month of the Xbox Game Pass included. The pass gives you access to literally hundreds of games, including Skyrim and Battlefield 5. It's crazy how many options there are. There's literally something for everyone to play, whether you're in the mood for some open world exploration or some fast-paced fun. I've been having a blast pushing Minecraft to its limits with this laptop. Ray tracing looks amazing and the display is just stunning. It really just feels like a handy portable version of my main setup. So if you guys want to get your hands on the Acer Predator Triton 300 SE and 1 month of Xbox Game Pass, check out the link in the description below. Now if you made it this far, please do subscribe and give this video a like. It'd be really awesome to get to 15k likes to know you guys are still enjoying this series. I really do put everything into these videos, so hearing your feedback does mean a lot. And of course, don't forget to check out the giveaway on my Instagram. Before we wrap things up, there are some serious thanks in order. A huge thanks to Goddeh for using his big brain to help with all the coding, creating all the cool effects you see in these mini movies, and generally supporting the technical side of this entire project. Also, thanks to Jake Rivers for creating the wonderful soundtrack for our USW videos. You can check his tunes out on Spotify if you're after the ultimate Minecraft tracks to jam to while gaming. And finally, a big thanks to all these awesome people for acting in the video. This wouldn't be possible without these guys. And that's it for today, guys. Thank you so much for the support, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!